The galaxy was vast, endless, and mostly indifferent to the struggles of its countless inhabitants. Among the billions of stars that dotted the night sky, one particular signal cut through the void like a scream in silence. It came from a distant planet orbiting a dying sun in the Andromeda Galaxy, a desperate cry for help sent by an alien species known as the Xylarans. Their homeworld was under siege, ravaged by mechanical monstrosities that consumed everything in their path. The message was simple, yet chilling. "We are dying. Please, if anyone hears this, save us." Unbeknownst to the Xylarans, their plea did not fall on deaf ears. Far across the cosmos, aboard a starship called the Iron Tempest, Commander Ji-un stood before her team, staring at the holographic projection of the SOS signal. Her face was calm, almost emotionless, but her sharp eyes betrayed a flicker of interest. Behind her, Lieutenant Hyun-soo adjusted his tactical visor, while Sergeant Min-kyu leaned against the wall with crossed arms, his scars telling stories of battles fought and won. Engineer Sira sat quietly at her console, analyzing the data streaming in from the transmission. The Iron Tempest wasn't just any ship. It carried humanity's most feared warriors, soldiers who had earned the title Deathworlders. These were no ordinary humans. They were genetically enhanced, forged in the crucible of Earth's post-apocalyptic environment after centuries of ecological collapse. They had adapted to survive where others could not, thriving in conditions that would kill lesser beings. To them, compassion was a luxury they couldn't afford, and mercy was often seen as weakness. Yet survival required resources, and scavenging from endangered civilizations had become standard practice. Commander Ji-un turned to face her crew. "This is our chance," she said, her voice steady and commanding. "If these aliens are being wiped out, there will be ruins left behind. Technology, supplies, anything we can use. But first, we need to know what we're dealing with." Hyun-soo nodded, already pulling up maps of the Xylaran system on his screen. "Their world looks devastated," he reported. "Scorched landscapes, collapsed cities, and massive energy signatures consistent with large-scale destruction. Whatever's attacking them isn't natural," Min-kyu grunted. "Could be another empire trying to expand. Or maybe some rogue AI gone mad. Either way, it doesn't matter. If they've got tech worth taking, we go in, grab it, and leave before things get messy." Sarah glanced up from her console, frowning slightly. "It feels wrong," she murmured, her voice barely audible over the hum of the ship's engines. "They're asking for help. Shouldn't we at least try to assist them?" Ji-un's gaze hardened as she looked at Sarah. "Help doesn't come free," she replied coldly. "These people are desperate. Desperation makes you reckless. We step in without knowing the full picture, and we could end up like them, dead or worse. Our priority is clear. Assess, adapt, and act accordingly." With that, the decision was made. The Iron Tempest set course for the Xylaran system, its sleek hull slicing through space like a blade. As they approached the doomed planet, the scope of the devastation became painfully obvious. The once thriving world was now a wasteland, its skies choked with ash and smoke. Rivers ran dry, forests had been reduced to charred skeletons, and entire cities lay in ruins. From orbit, the Deathworlders could see swarms of metallic creatures moving across the surface, their forms shifting and reforming as if alive. They were unlike anything the team had encountered before. "This isn't good," Hyun-soo muttered, zooming in on one of the machines. Its design was both intricate and horrifying, with jagged limbs and glowing red cores pulsating with energy. "Whatever those things are, they're tearing this place apart piece by piece." "They're efficient," Min-kyu observed, cracking his knuckles. "No wasted movement, no hesitation, just pure destruction." Ji-un studied the images carefully, her mind working through strategies and contingencies. "Land near the outskirts of the nearest settlement," she ordered. "We'll scout the area, gather intel, and decide our next move. Stick to protocol. Minimal contact, maximum caution." As the ship descended toward the surface, the air grew thick with tension. When the ramp lowered, revealing the desolate landscape outside, the Deathworlders stepped out onto alien soil. The ground beneath their boots was cracked and brittle, littered with debris and remnants of a civilization that had once thrived. The air smelled of burning metal and decay, and the distant roar of collapsing buildings echoed like thunder. It didn't take long for them to encounter survivors. A group of Xylarans emerged from the shadows, their frail bodies wrapped in tattered cloaks. One of them stepped forward, a young male named Kale. His large, expressive eyes darted nervously between the armored figures standing before him. He raised his hands in a gesture of peace, speaking haltingly in broken galactic standard. "Please," he begged, his voice trembling. "You must help us. The machines, they eat everything. They don't stop. They won't stop until nothing is left." Jiyeon regarded him coolly, her helmet hiding her expression. "Tell me about these machines," she demanded. "Where did they come from? What do they want?" Kyle hesitated, glancing back at his companions. "We don't know," he admitted. "They appeared suddenly without warning. At first we thought they were explorers, scouts from another race, but then they started changing, growing, consuming. We tried to fight back, but nothing works. They're unstoppable." Hyun-soo scanned the horizon, his sensors picking up faint traces of movement in the distance. "He's not lying," he confirmed. "There's a swarm heading this way. Big one." "We should move," Min-kyu suggested, gripping his weapon tightly. "Find cover, regroup, and figure out how to deal with this mess." But Jiyeon didn't budge. Instead, she turned back to Kale. "How many of your people are left?" she asked bluntly. Kale swallowed hard, lowering his gaze. "Not many," he admitted. "Thousands, maybe less. Most have fled underground, but even there the machines hunt us. We have nowhere else to go." For a moment, Ji-eun seemed to consider his words. Then, without warning, the ground shook violently as a massive shadow loomed overhead. The Deathworlders spun around, weapons drawn, as one of the machines emerged from the haze. Towering above them, its jagged form bristling with spikes and blades, it let out a low, guttural growl that vibrated through the very earth. "Hostile detected!" Hyun-soo shouted, raising his rifle. "Prepare for engagement!" The machine lunged forward with terrifying speed, its claws slashing through the air. But the Deathworlders were faster. Ji-eun barked orders, her voice cutting through the chaos like a knife. Hyun-soo unleashed a barrage of plasma rounds, each shot striking true against the creature's metallic hide. Min-kyu charged forward, wielding a heavy melee weapon, and delivered a crushing blow that sent the machine stumbling backward. Sarah worked frantically to disable its core, deploying a series of EMP grenades that sputtered and fizzled before finally taking effect. When the dust settled, the machine lay motionless, its red core dimmed and lifeless. Kale stared at the scene in stunned disbelief, his mouth agape. Never before had he seen such precision, such brutal efficiency. For the first time since the invasion began, a spark of hope ignited within him. These humans, they might actually be able to save us, he whispered to himself, clutching the edges of his cloak tightly. But Ji-eun's expression remained unreadable. She holstered her weapon and turned to her team. "Good work," she said simply. "Now let's see what else we're dealing with." As they moved deeper into the ruins, Kyle followed closely, explaining the plight of his people and begging for aid. Each word fell on seemingly deaf ears, but Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that something about this mission felt off. The Deathworlders weren't here to save anyone, they were here to survive. And survival, as Ji-eun often reminded, them came at a cost. Little did they know, the cost of this mission would be far greater than any of them could have imagined. The Deathworlders moved cautiously through the ruins of the Xylaran city, their boots crunching over shattered glass and twisted metal. The air was thick with the smell of burning and decay, a constant reminder of the devastation that had swept across the planet. Kyle, the young Xylaran who had approached them earlier, stayed close to the group, his wide eyes darting nervously between the towering alien soldiers. He clutched a small device in his hands, a translator module he had hastily assembled from scraps. It crackled faintly as he struggled to keep up with their brisk pace. Commander Ji-eun led the way, her weapon ready but relaxed at her side. She wasn't concerned about immediate danger. The machines, or harrowers, as Kale called them, seemed to operate in waves, retreating after each attack to regroup and adapt. For now, They were safe, at least for a short while. Her sharp gaze scanned the crumbling buildings around them, taking note of every detail. The architecture was strange, yet familiar, with sweeping curves and glowing veins of energy running through the walls. It reminded her of ancient Earth cities before humanity's fall, though these structures were far more advanced. "Tell me more about your people," Ji-un said suddenly, breaking the tense silence. Her tone was calm but firm, leaving no room for hesitation. Kyle jumped slightly at the sound of her voice, but quickly composed himself. We used to live peacefully here," he began, his words hesitant but earnest. "Our world was rich with resources, and our technology allowed us to thrive. We built great cities, explored the stars, and sought knowledge above all else. But then—" his voice trailed off as his eyes darkened with grief. "But then the Harrowers came," Hyun-soo finished for him, his tone flat and clinical. He adjusted, the settings on his visor scanning the area for any signs of movement. "They didn't negotiate. They didn't ask questions. They just started consuming everything." Kyle nodded solemnly. "Yes. At first we thought they were malfunctioning. Drones, perhaps sent by another race. But they grew stronger, faster, smarter. Every time we tried to fight back, they adapted. Now, there's almost nothing left." Sarah listened intently, her heart aching at the weight of Kyle's words. Despite herself, she felt a pang of sympathy for the young alien. There was something about his vulnerability, his desperation, that struck a chord deep within her. She glanced at Ji-un, hoping to see some sign of compassion, but the commander's face remained unreadable behind her helmet. "What do you want from us?" Kale asked finally, his voice trembling. "You're not like the others who've come before. You're different, stronger, smarter. If anyone can stop the Harrowers, it's you." Ji-un stopped walking and turned to face him. Her piercing gaze locked onto his, making him flinch involuntarily. "We're not here to save you," she said bluntly. "We're here because your situation interests us. Your technology, your resources, those are valuable. If helping you means gaining an advantage, we'll consider it. But don't mistake our presence for altruism." Kale's shoulders slumped, and for a moment, he looked as though he might collapse under the weight of her words. Then, gathering what little strength he had left, he straightened his posture and met her gaze. "Even if you don't care about us, Commander, I beg you to think about what happens if the Harrowers win. They won't stop with us. Once they've consumed this planet, they'll move on to the next, and the next, until there's nothing left." Min-kyu snorted derisively. "Kid's got guts," he muttered, earning a glare from Sarah. He ignored her and continued. "But he's wrong. Machines like those, they're programmed for efficiency. Once they've stripped this rock bare, they'll self-destruct or deactivate. Problem solved." "You don't know that," Sarah snapped, surprising even herself with the sharpness of her tone. She rarely spoke out against her teammates, especially Min-kyu, but something about his dismissive attitude infuriated her. "What if they do spread? What if they reach Earth? Are you willing to risk billions of lives just because you think they'll stop?" Min-kyu shrugged, unfazed. "Risk is part of the job. Besides, Earth's got its own problems. Let someone else deal with this mess." Ji-un raised a hand, silencing the argument before it could escalate further. "Enough," she ordered. "We're here to gather information, not debate philosophy. Kale, show us where your people are hiding. If we're going to assess the threat, we need to see the full picture." Reluctantly, Kale led them toward a nearby underground bunker. The entrance was concealed beneath a pile of rubble, accessible only through a narrow tunnel that forced the heavily armored Deathworlders to move single file. Inside, the air was cool and damp, illuminated by dim blue lights that flickered intermittently. Dozens of Xylarans huddled together in makeshift shelters, their faces gaunt and hollow-eyed. Children clung to their parents, too frightened to cry, while elders whispered prayers in hushed tones. Hyun-soo scanned the room, his sensors picking up vital signs and energy readings. "This place won't hold for long," he reported grimly. "Structural integrity is compromised, and the power supply is failing. If the Harrowers find them, they're dead." "They already know we're here," Kyle admitted quietly. "Every time one of us ventures outside, they track us. It's only a matter of time before they break through." Sarah knelt beside a wounded Xyloran woman, examining the burns covering her arms. The injuries were severe, the flesh blackened and cracked, but the woman managed a weak smile when she noticed Sarah's concern. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "For coming." Sarah swallowed hard, forcing herself to nod. She wanted to say something comforting, anything to ease the woman's suffering, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, she focused on applying a temporary patch to the wound, knowing it would do little to alleviate the pain. As the team gathered data and assessed the situation, Ji-eun pulled Kyle aside. "How many of these bunkers are there?" she asked, her tone softer than before, but still authoritative. "3," Kyle replied. "Maybe 4. Most are like this one, overcrowded and falling apart. A few have better defenses, but even those won't last forever." Ji-eun nodded thoughtfully. "And the Harrower's central hive? Where is it located?" Kale hesitated, clearly torn between fear and hope. "It's deep underground, near the planet's core. That's where they originate from, the source of their power. But getting there, it's impossible. Even our strongest warriors couldn't survive the journey." "Nothing's impossible," Ji-eun countered, her voice firm. "Just difficult. Show me the coordinates, and we'll plan accordingly." While Ji-eun strategized with Kale, tensions among the Deathworlders continued to simmer. Hyun-soo worked silently, mapping out potential routes and calculating probabilities, while Min-kyu paced back and forth, muttering under his breath about wasted time. Sarah, meanwhile, found herself drawn to the Xyloran's plight. She listened to their stories, shared their tears, and offered what little comfort she could. Each interaction chipped away at the emotional armor she had built over years of service, leaving her vulnerable in ways she hadn't anticipated. By the time they returned to the surface, night had fallen, or what passed for night on this dying world. The sky was a swirling mass of ash and smoke, blocking out the stars and casting an eerie red glow over the landscape. In the distance, the faint hum of approaching harrowers could be heard, growing louder with each passing second. "We need to move," Hyun-soo warned, his sensors detecting multiple signatures converging on their position. "Now," Ji-eun gave the order, and the team sprang into action. They escorted the Xylorans deeper into the tunnels, setting up defensive positions along the way. As they worked, Kyle stayed close to Sarah, his gratitude evident in every glance and gesture. "You're different from the others," he told her softly. "You care." Sarah hesitated, unsure how to respond. "I'm just doing my job," she said finally, though the words felt hollow even to her own ears. When the Harrowers attacked, the battle was fierce and chaotic. The machines poured into the tunnels, their claws slicing through walls and ceilings as they hunted for prey. The Deathworlders fought with ruthless efficiency, their weapons blazing and tactics flawless. Hyun-soo coordinated their movements, directing fire and deploying traps to slow the enemy advance. Min-kyu charged headlong into the fray, his brute strength and combat skills turning the tide in their favor. Even Sarah held her ground, using her engineering expertise to disable key components of the Harrowers' systems. But despite their efforts, the sheer number of enemies overwhelmed them. One by one, the Xylarans fell, their screams echoing through the tunnels as the Harrowers tore them apart. Kyle watched in horror as his people were slaughtered, his faith in the Deathworlders wavering with each casualty. Finally, Ji-eun made the call to retreat. "Fall back to the extraction point," she shouted over the din of battle. "We've done enough damage here. Time to go." "No," Kyle protested, grabbing her arm. "You can't leave us. Please, you have to help us." Ji-eun shook him off, her expression cold and unyielding. "We're not here to play hero, kid. Survival is our priority. If you want to live, you'll follow us. Otherwise, stay and die." With that, she turned and disappeared into the shadows, her team following, closely behind. Kale stood frozen for a moment, torn between despair and determination. The Iron Tempest drifted silently through the void of space, its engines humming softly as it put distance between itself and the dying Xylaran world. Inside the ship, the atmosphere was tense, heavy with unspoken thoughts and unresolved emotions. The Deathworlders had survived another mission, but the weight of what they had witnessed and done lingered like a shadow over each of them. Commander Ji-eun stood in the center of the briefing room, her arms crossed as she studied the holographic display floating before her. It showed a detailed map of the Zilaran planet, marked with red zones indicating areas overrun by the harrowers. Her sharp eyes scanned the data, analyzing every detail, searching for patterns or weaknesses that could be exploited. Beside her, Lieutenant Hyun-soo adjusted his visor, pulling up additional overlays to highlight potential tactical advantages. "We need to decide our next move," Ji-eun said finally, her voice cutting through the silence like a blade. "The intel we gathered is valuable, but it's not enough. If we're going to take on the harrowers, we'll need more than brute force." Hyun-soo nodded, pointing to a cluster of glowing nodes on the map. "These appear to be key hubs in their network," he explained. "Disrupting even one could slow their advance significantly, but getting close will be risky. Their defenses are adaptive, and they seem to anticipate our strategies almost instantly." Sergeant Min-kyu leaned against the wall, his massive frame casting a long shadow across the floor. His scarred face was unreadable, but there was a hardness in his gaze that spoke volumes. "Risk is part of the job," he growled, echoing his earlier words. "If we hit them hard enough, fast enough, they won't have time to adapt. Simple as that." Engineer Sira sat at her console, her fingers flying over the keys as she sifted through the data recovered from the harrower's wreckage. Unlike the others, she seemed distracted, her mind elsewhere. Her brow furrowed as she examined fragments of code and schematics, piecing together the inner workings of the machines. There was something unsettlingly familiar about their design, though she couldn't quite place it. "Simple isn't always effective," Sarah muttered under her breath, earning a raised eyebrow from Min-kyu. She ignored him and turned to Ji-eun. "These machines, they're not just random invaders. Their technology has traces of Earth-based designs, old ones, predating the collapse. Someone built them, programmed them. This wasn't an accident." Ji-eun frowned, her expression darkening. "You're saying this is connected to us?" "Possibly," Sarah admitted, hesitating. "Or maybe someone else found our tech and repurposed it. Either way, we can't ignore the possibility that humanity's fingerprints are all over this mess." The room fell silent as the implications sank in. For years, the Deathworlders had prided themselves on their independence, their ability to carve out a future in the harshest corners of the galaxy. But if Sarah was right, if humanity's past mistakes had played a role in creating the harrowers, it raised uncomfortable questions about their legacy and responsibility. Kyle, who had been standing quietly near the doorway, cleared his throat, nervously. All eyes turned to him, and he shifted uncomfortably under their collective gaze. "I don't understand everything you're talking about," he began, his voice hesitant but sincere. "But I know one thing for sure. Those machines aren't just attacking my people. They're targeting life itself. Everything organic, everything living. They consume it without hesitation. If you don't stop them, no one will." His words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. Ji-eun stared at him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Then, without a word, she turned back to the hologram and began issuing orders. "We'll split into 2 teams," she announced. "Hyun-soo, you'll lead a recon mission to one of the hubs. Gather as much intel as you can, but avoid direct engagement unless absolutely necessary. Min-kyu, you're with me. We'll set up a forward base near the central hive and prepare for a full-scale assault. Sarah, I want you working non-stop to crack their systems. Find a weakness we can exploit." "And what about me?" Kale asked, his voice tinged with desperation. "What can I do?" Ji-eun glanced at him briefly, her tone clipped and dismissive. "Stay out of the way. You've done your part." Kale flinched but didn't argue. Instead, he retreated to a corner of the ship, watching silently as the Deathworlders prepared for battle. Despite Ji-eun's cold demeanor, he couldn't shake the feeling that these humans were different from anyone he'd ever met. They were ruthless, yes, but also capable of incredible feats. He clung to that hope, however faint, as the hours passed. Meanwhile, aboard the Iron Tempest, tensions continued to simmer among the team. Hyun-soo worked meticulously, planning every step of his recon mission with precision. He trusted Ji-eun, implicitly, but he couldn't help feeling uneasy about splitting their forces. The harrowers were unpredictable, and dividing their strength might leave them vulnerable. Min-Q, on the other hand, seemed unfazed. He spent his time sharpening his weapons and testing new modifications, his confidence unwavering. To him, the mission was straightforward. Find the enemy, destroy the enemy. Anything beyond that was irrelevant. Sarah, however, struggled to focus. Her mind kept drifting back to the Xylarans, their faces, their stories, their desperate pleas for help. She had always believed in the Deathworlders' mission, their mantra of survival at all costs. But now, doubts crept in, gnawing at her resolve. Was this really who they were meant to be? Ruthless scavengers, taking what they needed and leaving devastation in their wake? Her thoughts were interrupted by Ji-Yun, who approached her station with a grim expression. "Report!" the commander demanded, her tone leaving no room for excuses. "I'm close," Sarah replied, gesturing to the screen. "Their systems are complex, but there's a pattern, a flaw. If we can overload their central core, we might be able to shut them down entirely." Ji-Yun nodded, satisfied. "Good. Keep working. We'll need every advantage we can get." As Ji-Yun walked away, Sarah hesitated, then called out softly, "Commander, do you ever wonder if we've gone too far? If we're becoming the very thing we fight against?" Ji-Yun paused, her back still turned. For a moment, she didn't respond. Then, in a voice so quiet it was almost lost in the hum of the ship's engines, she said, "Wondering doesn't change anything. Survival isn't pretty, Sarah. It's brutal. And sometimes, the hardest choices are the ones that keep us alive." With that, she left, leaving Sarah alone with her thoughts. The recon mission went smoothly. At first, Hyun-Soo led his team deep into enemy territory, avoiding detection as they gathered critical data on the Harrowers' operations. The machines moved with eerie efficiency, their forms shifting and adapting to changes in their environment. Hyun-Soo marveled at their complexity, even as he recognized the threat they posed. But things took a turn when they reached the hub. What had appeared dormant suddenly sprang to life, swarms of smaller Harrowers emerging from hidden alcoves. The team fought lifelessly, their weapons blazing as they tried to hold their ground, but the machines were relentless, overwhelming them with sheer numbers. Back at the forward base, Ji-Yun and Min-Q received the distress call. Without hesitation, Ji-Yun ordered an extraction squad to retrieve Hyun-Soo and his team. As they prepared to launch, Kale approached her once more. "Let me help," he pleaded, his voice trembling with urgency. "I may not be a soldier, but I know this planet better than anyone. I can guide you." For a moment, Ji-Yun considered refusing, but something in Kale's eyes, a flicker of determination, made her pause. Finally, she nodded curtly. "Fine. But stay close and do exactly as I say." Together, they boarded a dropship and raced toward the embattled recon team. The journey was perilous, the skies filled with ash and debris as the Harrowers launched wave after wave of attacks. Kale proved invaluable, navigating the treacherous terrain with ease and leading them to shortcuts that saved precious time. When they arrived, the scene was chaos. Hyun-Soo and his team were pinned down, their ammunition running low and injuries mounting. The Harrowers surrounded them, their jagged forms bristling with menace. Ji-Yun wasted no time, barking orders as she leapt into the fray. Min-Q charged ahead, his brute strength clearing a path through the swarm, while Kale used his knowledge of the area to create diversions. In the end, they managed to extract the recon team, retreating just as the hub collapsed in a fiery explosion. Back aboard the Iron Tempest, the survivors regrouped, battered but alive. Hyun-Soo reported his findings, confirming Sarah's suspicions. The Harrowers' central hive was indeed their greatest vulnerability, but the cost of the mission weighed heavily on everyone. Lives had been lost, both human and Xylaran, and as Kale looked out at the stars, his heart ached with the knowledge that his people's fate still hung in the balance. "We're running out of time," he whispered to himself, and so are they. Inside the ship, the Deathworlders prepared for the final phase of their operation. The central hive awaited them, a fortress of steel and fire. Victory, or annihilation, was within reach. The Iron Tempest descended through the planet's thick, ash-choked atmosphere, its engines roaring as it approached the coordinates of the Harrowers' central hive. The Deathworlders had spent hours preparing for this moment, arming themselves. with every weapon and tool at their disposal. Yet, despite their readiness, an uneasy tension hung over the team. They knew what was at stake, not just the survival of the Xylarons, but perhaps the fate of countless other worlds that could fall prey to the machines. Commander Ji-un stood at the helm, her sharp eyes fixed on the holographic map displayed before her. The hive loomed large in the projection, a sprawling structure buried deep beneath the planet's surface. Its design was both alien and eerily familiar, with jagged spires jutting out like the ribs of some colossal beast. Sayra's analysis had confirmed that the core of the hive housed the central processing unit, a pulsating red orb that served as the brain of the entire Harrower network. Destroying it would cripple the machines, rendering them inert. "This is it," Ji-un said, her voice steady but laced with urgency. "Once we're inside, there's no turning back. Stick to the plan. Min-Kyu, you're on point. Hyun-Soo, cover our flanks. Sayra, keep monitoring their systems. If anything changes, I want to know immediately." The team nodded in unison, their faces grim but resolute. Kale, who had insisted on accompanying them, stood quietly near the rear of the group. He clutched a makeshift energy rifle scavenged from the wreckage of his people's defenses, his hands trembling slightly. Though he lacked the combat training of the Deathworlders, his determination burned brightly. He refused to let fear dictate his actions, not when so much depended on their success. As they disembarked from the ship, the air was thick with smoke and the acrid stench of burning metal. The ground beneath their boots was cracked and unstable, littered with debris from the ruined city above. Jagged towers of blackened steel rose around them, casting long shadows that danced ominously in the dim light. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the distant hum of machinery and the occasional groan of collapsing structures. "This place feels wrong," Hyun-Soo muttered, scanning the area with his visor. His sensors picked up faint traces of movement in the distance, though nothing substantial enough to warrant immediate concern. "Like it's alive." "It is alive," Sayra replied, her tone subdued. She held up a handheld device, its screen flickering with streams of data. "Every piece of this hive is connected to the core. It's not just a machine, it's a living organism feeding off everything around it." Min-Kyu grunted, adjusting the heavy plasma cannon strapped to his back. "Whatever it is, it dies today." The team moved cautiously toward the entrance of the hive, a gaping maw of twisted metal and glowing veins of energy. As they approached, the ground began to tremble, and the low hum grew louder, vibrating through the very earth. Suddenly, the walls shifted, revealing rows of jagged spikes that barred their path. From the shadows emerged a swarm of harrowers, their forms sleek and predatory, their glowing red cores pulsating with malevolent energy. "Here we go," Ji-un said, raising her weapon. "Stay sharp." The battle erupted instantly, a cacophony of gunfire and metallic shrieks filling the air. The harrowers lunged forward with terrifying speed, their claws slicing through the darkness. Min-Kyu unleashed a barrage of plasma rounds, each shot striking true against the machine's armored hides. Hyun-Soo worked methodically, deploying EMP grenades that sputtered and fizzled before disabling entire clusters of enemies. Sayra stayed close to the group, using her engineering skills to hack into the Harrowers' systems, creating temporary glitches that slowed their advance. Kale fought alongside them, his aim surprisingly accurate despite his lack of experience. He fired bursts of energy at the machines, dodging their attacks with surprising agility. Each kill fueled his resolve, driving him deeper into the fray. But even as he fought, he couldn't shake the feeling that they were being toyed with, that the Harrowers were testing them, probing their weaknesses. "They're learning," Sayra shouted, her voice tinged with panic. "Their systems are adapting faster than I can counteract." "Keep moving," Ji-un barked, her voice cutting through the chaos. "We don't have time to stand and fight." The team pressed onward, fighting their way through wave after wave of enemies. The corridors of the hive twisted and turned unpredictably, forcing them to rely on Sayra's scans to navigate. Every step brought them closer to the core, but the cost was mounting. Min-Kyu sustained several deep gashes across his arms, though he ignored the pain, his focus unwavering. Hyun-Soo's visor flickered intermittently, damaged by a lucky strike from one of the Harrowers. Even Ji-Yun bore signs of strain, her movements slightly slower than usual. Finally, they reached the heart of the hive, a massive chamber dominated by the central core. The orb pulsed rhythmically, bathing the room in an eerie red glow. Thick cables snaked outward from its base, connecting it to the surrounding walls and ceiling. The air was charged with static electricity, making the hairs on their necks stand on end. "There," Ji-Yun said, pointing to the core. "Seira, disable it. Now!" Seira rushed forward, her fingers flying over the keys of her device as she attempted to interface with the core. Her brow furrowed in concentration, sweat dripping down her face. "It's resisting," she muttered, frustration creeping into her voice. "The encryption is unlike anything I've ever seen." "Try harder," Minkyu growled, firing wildly at a group of harrowers that had begun to close in. "I'm trying," Seira snapped, her voice cracking under the pressure. She glanced up briefly, her eyes meeting Ji-Un's. For a moment, she saw something in the commander's gaze, something softer, almost human. Then it was gone, replaced by the same steely resolve that had carried them this far. Just as the harrowers prepared to overwhelm them, Kale stepped forward, clutching a small explosive, charge he had salvaged earlier. "I'll buy you time," he said, his voice steady despite the fear in his eyes. Before anyone could stop him, he darted toward the core, planting the charge directly on its surface. "No!" Ji-Yun shouted, but it was too late. Kale activated the timer and sprinted back toward the group, his movements frantic. The countdown began, ticking away the seconds with agonizing slowness. "Fall back," Ji-Yun ordered, grabbing Seira by the arm and pulling her toward the exit. The team retreated as quickly as they could, their footsteps echoing through the narrow corridors. Behind them, the core began to destabilize, its red glow intensifying until it filled the entire chamber. When the explosion came, it was deafening. A shock wave rippled through the hive, collapsing walls and sending debris raining down upon them. The team barely made it outside before the entrance collapsed entirely, sealing the hive shut. They stumbled into the open air, gasping for breath, as the ground continued to quake beneath their feet. For a moment, there was silence. Then, slowly, the hum of machinery faded, replaced by the distant cries of survivors emerging from hiding. The harrowers were gone, or so it seemed. Kale sank to his knees, tears streaming down his face. He had expected to die in the explosion, but somehow he had survived. Whether it was luck or fate, he didn't know. All he knew was that his people were safe, for now. Ji-Yun watched him silently, her expression unreadable. Then, without a word, she turned and began walking back toward the ship. The others followed, their bodies battered, but their spirits intact. They had won, but the victory felt hollow. As the iron tempest lifted off the surface, leaving the devastated world behind, Kale stared out the viewport, watching the ruins shrink into the distance. His heart ached with grief and gratitude, knowing that the cost of their survival had been paid in blood and sacrifice. Inside the ship, the Deathworlders regrouped, their faces marked by exhaustion and quiet reflection. They had completed their mission, secured their objectives, and proven once again why they were feared throughout the galaxy. But cracks had formed in their unity, doubts that couldn't be silenced. And somewhere in the depths of space, the echoes of their actions lingered, waiting to be remembered or forgotten. The iron tempest drifted silently through the void of space, its engines humming softly as it carried the Deathworlders away from the ruined Xyloran world. The mission was over, or so it seemed. The Harrowers had been defeated, their central hive destroyed in a fiery explosion that left the planet scarred but free. Yet, for all their success, the air aboard the ship felt heavy, weighed down by unspoken thoughts and lingering questions. Commander Ji-Yun stood on the bridge, her arms crossed as she stared out at the stars. Her sharp eyes reflected the faint glow of the ship's control panels, but her mind was elsewhere. She replayed the events of the past days in her head, analyzing every decision, every action. Had they done enough? Could they have saved more lives? These were not questions she often allowed herself to ask, but now They gnawed at her like a persistent wound. Behind her, Lieutenant Hyun-soo worked quietly at his console, reviewing the data collected during their assault on the hive. His visor flickered intermittently, still damaged from the battle, but he ignored the inconvenience, focusing instead on the task at hand. Beside him, Sergeant Min-kyu leaned against the wall, his massive frame casting a long shadow across the floor. He cleaned his weapon methodically, his movements deliberate and precise, though there was a tension in his jaw that betrayed his unease. Engineer Sarah sat alone in the corner of the room, her hands trembling slightly as she scrolled through the final logs of the Harrower's systems. The encryption had been unlike anything she'd ever encountered, a labyrinth of code that hinted at origins far older and darker than she had imagined. Her heart raced as she pieced together fragments of information, her mind struggling to make sense of what she was seeing. Something about the machines felt unfinished, as if their destruction had merely delayed the inevitable. Kyle, the young Xyloran who had risked everything to help them, sat nearby, his gaze fixed on the viewport. He watched the stars streak by, his expression a mixture of gratitude and sorrow. His people had survived, but at a terrible cost. Thousands were dead, their cities reduced to rubble, their culture all but erased. And yet, despite the devastation, Kale clung to hope. He whispered prayers under his breath, vowing to rebuild what little remained of his world. "Commander," Sarah said suddenly, breaking the silence. Her voice was soft but urgent, drawing everyone's attention. "I think you need to see this." Ji-eun turned to face her, her brow furrowing. "What is it?" Sarah hesitated, her fingers hovering over the screen. "It's the core. Before it was destroyed, I managed to extract some of its data. There's something here, something we missed." Hyun-soo stepped forward, peering over her shoulder. "Show me." Sarah tapped a few keys, and a series of symbols appeared on the display. They pulsed faintly, shifting and rearranging themselves in patterns that defied logic. "These aren't just instructions or programming," she explained. "They're coordinates, locations spread across multiple star systems." Min-kyu frowned, his grip tightening on his weapon. "You're saying those things weren't alone?" "No," Sarah replied, her voice barely above a whisper. "They were part of something bigger, a network. And if these coordinates are accurate, there are more hives out there. Dozens of them, maybe hundreds." The room fell silent as the implications sank in. The Harrowers hadn't been an isolated threat. They were a plague, spreading across the galaxy with terrifying efficiency. Destroying one hive had been a victory, but it was only a single battle in a much larger war. Ji-eun's expression darkened, her jaw tightening as she processed the information. "If this is true, then we've barely scratched the surface," she said finally, her tone clipped and authoritative. "We need to report this to command. They'll want to know what we found." "And then what?" Hyun-soo asked, his voice tinged with skepticism. "Even if they send reinforcements, how do we stop something like this? We barely survived one hive. What happens when we face 10 or 20? "We adapt," Ji-eun replied sharply. "That's what we do. That's what humanity does. If we don't fight, no one will." Her words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. For years, the Deathworlders had prided themselves on their resilience, their ability to survive in the harshest corners of the galaxy. But now, faced with a threat that transcended borders and species, their resolve was tested in ways they hadn't anticipated. Kale listened quietly, his heart pounding in his chest. He had trusted these humans, believed in their strength and ingenuity. But now, hearing their doubts and fears, he couldn't help but wonder if even they could stand against such overwhelming odds. "Maybe," he began hesitantly, drawing their attention. "Maybe we can work together. My people, what's left of us. We can help. We know how these machines think, how they operate. If we share our knowledge." Ji-eun studied him for a moment, her expression unreadable. Then, slowly, she nodded. "It's a start," she admitted. "But it won't be easy. Trust isn't something that comes naturally to us, or to anyone for that matter." Kale smiled faintly, a glimmer of hope shining in his eyes. "Then, We'll build it. Together. As the Iron Tempest continued its journey, the team prepared to deliver their findings to Earth's command. The coordinates Sarah had uncovered would become the foundation of a new strategy, one that required cooperation on a galactic scale. But even as they planned for the battles ahead, cracks within the team became more apparent. Min-Kyu grew increasingly restless, his frustration boiling over into sharp comments and heated arguments. "This isn't our fight," he snapped during one particularly tense discussion. "Let someone else deal with it. We've done our part." "That's not how it works," Hyun-Soo countered, his voice calm but firm. "If we walk away now, we're no better than the machines we're trying to stop." "And what about us?" Min-Kyu shot back, gesturing angrily at the others. "When do we get to rest? When do we stop risking our lives for people who don't even care about us?" "It's not about them," Sarah interjected softly. "It's about survival. If those machines reach Earth, none of us will be safe." For a moment, no one spoke. The weight of her words settled over them, forcing each of them to confront the reality of their situation. They were soldiers, yes, but they were also human. And humanity, for all its flaws, had always found a way to endure. Ji-eun watched the exchange silently, her expression thoughtful. Then, without warning, she turned to Kyle. "Tell me about your people," she said, her tone softer than usual. "What made you fight back when everything seemed lost?" Kyle hesitated, surprised by the question. "Hope," he replied simply. "Even when things looked darkest, we held on to the belief that tomorrow could be better. That's what kept us going." Ji-eun nodded, her gaze distant. "Hope," she repeated quietly, almost to herself. "Maybe that's something worth fighting for." When the Iron Tempest finally reached Earth's orbit, the Deathworlders disembarked with mixed emotions. Their mission had changed them, forcing them to confront truths they had long avoided. They had faced unimaginable horrors, made impossible choices, and emerged stronger, but not unscathed. As they reported their findings to command, Kyle stood beside them, his presence a testament to the fragile bond they had forged. Together, they outlined a plan to combat the Harrowers, emphasizing the need for unity and cooperation. It was a daunting task, one that would require sacrifices beyond measure. But for the first time, the Deathworlders felt a sense of purpose that extended beyond mere survival. In the days that followed, preparations began for a new campaign, one that would span galaxies and unite countless species in a shared struggle for existence. The Deathworlders took their place at the forefront, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. Yet, as Ji-eun gazed up at the stars, she couldn't shake the feeling that their journey was far from over. The Harrowers were gone, but their legacy remained, a reminder of the darkness that lurked in the shadows of the universe. And somewhere, deep within her, a spark of hope flickered to life, urging her to keep moving forward. For the Deathworlders, survival was no longer just about enduring, it was about protecting, about standing against the tide of destruction and refusing to yield. And though the road ahead was uncertain, they walked it with determination, knowing that their actions would shape the future of countless worlds. As the galaxy braced itself for the battles to come, the legend of Earth's Deathworlders spread far and wide, not as harbingers of cruelty, but as warriors who had faced despair and chosen to fight for something greater. And in the hearts of those who remembered, their names would live on forever.